Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're stepping into a story that starts in a familiar kitchen and ends at a ruined wedding altar. This is Narratives of Aunt Mary's, where Black women's stories in America are told honestly, with every slammed door, forged smile, and late-night prayer still attached. Picture this. You're standing in the same kitchen where you packed your son's school lunches, where you ironed his little shirts before picture day. The coffee pot is still steaming in your hand when his bride sits at your table, taps her perfect nails, and says, "We took a vote. You're not invited to the wedding. You can keep the $60,000 deposit if you want to see your future grandchild." In that moment, the room doesn't just go quiet, it tilts. Your son's silence suddenly feels louder than her voice, and you realize she's treating your love like a bargaining chip. And here's the hard reality check. If you ever find yourself across the table from someone willing to weaponize your own child and an unborn baby, you might not walk away with your sanity or your heart still intact. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And while you're here, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel, from big cities to small towns, from night shift breaks to quiet bedrooms where you're finally alone with your thoughts. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for a little soft background noise. And let's begin tonight's journey together. My son's bride said, "We voted and decided to cancel your invitation. You can keep the $160K deposit if you want to see your future grandson." I laughed and replied, "All right, dear, just wait. I paid someone to play a video at the wedding." I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm 62 years old, and I thought I'd seen every kind of cruelty life could throw at me. I was wrong. "We took a vote," Sienna announced, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against my kitchen table. "Malcolm and I decided we don't want you at our wedding." I stood there, holding the coffee pot, steam rising between us, like the anger building in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't process what she'd just said. This was my kitchen in the house where I'd raised Malcolm for 28 years. The same kitchen where he'd eaten countless bowls of cereal before school, where we'd talked through his teenage heartbreaks, where I'd celebrated every milestone of his life. And now this woman, this girl who'd been in his life for barely 2 years, was telling me I wasn't welcome at my own son's wedding. "Excuse me," I managed to say, setting the pot down before I dropped it. Sienna's green eyes held no warmth, no remorse. She was beautiful in that cold, calculated way that some women perfected. Every blonde hair in place, makeup applied with surgical precision, designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "You can keep the $60,000 deposit if you want," she continued as if she were discussing the weather. "Consider it your contribution to your future grandchild." The word grandchild hit me like a physical blow. 3 weeks ago, Malcolm had called me crying with joy, telling me Sienna was pregnant. I'd been planning to be the grandmother I never had, the one who'd spoil this baby, who'd babysit on weekends, who'd be there for every first step and first word. Now she was dangling my grandchild like a carrot, using an unborn baby as a weapon against me. "This is ridiculous," I said, my voice shaking. Malcolm would never agree to this. Sienna smiled, and there was something serpentine about it. Oh, but he did. We had a long conversation about toxic family dynamics and how they affect children. He agrees that distance from certain influences would be healthier for our family. Toxic family dynamics. Those weren't Malcolm's words. In 28 years, my son had never once called me toxic. Demanding, maybe overprotective, certainly, but toxic. That word belonged to someone else's vocabulary. Where is he? I demanded. I want to hear this from Malcolm himself. He's at work. He knew this conversation would be difficult for you to accept, so he asked me to handle it. She stood up, smoothing down her expensive dress. Look, Bernice, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm just protecting my family. Her family. Not our family. Not Malcolm's family. Her family. I watched her gather her purse, move toward the door as if she owned the place. As if she'd just delivered good news instead of dropping a bomb in the middle of my life. You know what, Sienna? I called after her, my voice steadier now. She paused at the door, looking back with that same cold smile. What? You're right about one thing. This conversation is difficult for me to accept. I moved closer to her, close enough to see the faint lines around her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite hide. But not for the reasons you think. Her smile faltered slightly. You see, in all the years I've known my son, he's never once made a major decision without talking to me first. Not about college, not about his career, not about buying his house. So, the idea that he'd suddenly decide to exclude me from the most important day of his life without so much as a phone call. I shook my head. That doesn't sound like the Malcolm I raised. Sienna's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. People change. Bernice. Malcolm is learning to set boundaries, or someone's teaching him to. We stared at each other for a long moment. I could see her calculating, measuring, deciding how much resistance I might offer. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 40 years working in human resources, reading people, identifying the manipulators and the troublemakers before they could do damage. And everything about Sienna screamed trouble. The decision is final, she said. Her voice colder now, the fake sweetness completely gone. You can either accept it gracefully, or we can do this the hard way. But either way, you won't be at our wedding. She walked out without another word, leaving me standing in my kitchen, surrounded by the silence of my empty house. I sank into the chair she'd vacated, still warm from her body heat, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. 2 hours ago. I'd been planning my outfit for my son's wedding. I'd been researching caterers for small family dinners after the ceremony, thinking about how to welcome Sienna into our family, despite my reservations about her. Now, I was apparently the enemy. My phone was in my hand before I realized I'd picked it up. Malcolm's number was on speed dial. But as I started to call, Sienna's words echoed in my mind. He knew this conversation would be difficult for you to accept. So he asked me to handle it. If that were true, if Malcolm really had sent his fiancée to uninvite his own mother to his wedding, then calling him would only make me look desperate, pathetic. Exactly the kind of toxic behavior Sienna had probably described to him. But if it wasn't true, I set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the street where Malcolm had learned to ride his bike, where he'd played catch with his father before the divorce, where he'd brought home every stray dog and broken-winged bird he could find. That boy, my boy, would never hurt me like this. which meant someone else was doing the hurting. As I stood there watching the afternoon shadows grow longer across my lawn, I felt something shift inside me. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by something harder, more focused. Sienna had made a mistake. She'd underestimated me. Assumed that, like most 62-year-old mothers, I'd simply accept this rejection and fade quietly into the background. She was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong woman to underestimate. I picked up my phone again, but this time, I didn't call Malcolm. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't used in years. Ruth Caldwell, my former colleague from HR who'd left the corporate world to become a private investigator. It was time to find out exactly who Sienna really was and what she was hiding. Ruth arrived at my house 3 days later, carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the same no-nonsense expression she'd perfected during our years in corporate HR. At 65, she was still sharp as a tack. Her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her dark eyes missing nothing. "You were right to call me," she said, settling into my living room with her coffee. "Your future daughter-in-law is quite the piece of work." My stomach clenched. Part of me had hoped Ruth would find nothing, that my suspicions were just the paranoid imaginings of an overprotective mother. But the grim satisfaction in Ruth's voice told me otherwise. "What did you find?" Ruth opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and what looked like printed social media posts. Let's start with her employment history, or should I say lack thereof. She handed me a sheet of paper covered in dates and company names, most with red X's marked beside them, in the past 5 years. Sienna has worked at 7 different companies. She's never been fired. Always quit voluntarily, usually citing hostile work environments or personality conflicts with supervisors. I scanned the list, recognizing several prestigious firms. These are good companies. I know people who work at half of these places. Exactly. So, I made some calls. Ruth pulled out her phone, flipping through her notes. According to her former supervisor at Meridian Financial, Sienna had a talent for causing drama between co-workers. She'd share confidential information, start rumors, then play innocent when conflicts erupted. My hands tightened around my coffee mug, and they all just let her quit. It's easier than dealing with a lawsuit. Sienna is very careful about how she operates. She never does anything overtly illegal, never leaves a paper trail. But she has a pattern of identifying the most influential person in any environment and finding a way to get close to them. Ruth handed me a photograph, Sienna at what looked like a company Christmas party, standing close to an older man in an expensive suit. This is Richard Hawthorne, CEO of Meridian. Married, 3 kids, spotless reputation. According to my source, Sienna managed to convince him that she was being sexually harassed by her direct supervisor. Was she? The supervisor in question is a 60-year-old woman who's been happily married for 35 years. Ruth's expression was grim. But by the time HR investigated, Sienna had already quit, claiming the hostile environment was affecting her mental health. The female supervisor was quietly transferred to another department. I felt sick, so she destroys people for sport. Not sport, strategy. She identifies threats and neutralizes them. Ruth pulled out another document. But here's where it gets interesting. I couldn't find any record of Lilia before 5 years ago. What do you mean? No high school records, no college transcripts, no previous addresses. It's like she materialized out of thin air at age 25. Ruth leaned forward. That takes effort, Bernice, and money. People don't erase their past unless they have something significant to hide. The room felt colder suddenly. I thought about Sienna in my kitchen, so confident, so calculating. What about her family? Malcolm mentioned her parents died in a car accident. Ruth shook her head. I couldn't verify that story. No obituaries. No accident reports. Nothing. Either she's lying about their deaths or she's lying about who they were. I sat down my coffee, my hands shaking slightly. Ruth, what kind of person am I dealing with here? The kind who studies people, finds their weaknesses, and exploits them. Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. And I'm afraid she's been studying your son for 2 years, learning exactly how to manipulate him over the next hour. Ruth walked me through what she'd discovered about Sienna's relationship with Malcolm. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. She'd gradually isolated him from his friends, always with reasonable explanations. His college buddy, Reggie, suddenly became too immature for someone planning a future. His coworker, Tyrone, was obviously jealous of Malcolm's success and promotion. She even managed to create distance between Malcolm and his neighbors. Ruth said, showing me printed text messages she'd somehow obtained. Look at this conversation about the Jeffersons next door. I read the messages, feeling increasingly sick. In them, Sienna told Malcolm that Mrs. Jefferson had made passive-aggressive comments about their relationship, suggesting that Malcolm was too good for someone like her. The messages painted a picture of neighbors who'd been cold and unwelcoming to Sienna. But the Jeffersons have been nothing but kind, I protested. They help Malcolm move in. They watch his house when he travels. Mrs. Jefferson brings him homemade cookies every Christmas. Exactly. But now Malcolm believes they disapprove of his relationship. When was the last time he mentioned them to you? I thought back over recent conversations with my son, the Jeffersons, who used to feature regularly in his stories about home improvements and neighborhood barbecues, had completely disappeared from his narrative months ago. She's been rewriting his reality, I whispered, and saving the biggest target for last. Ruth's eyes met mine. You. She showed me more evidence, carefully crafted conversations where Sienna had planted seeds of doubt about my relationship with Malcolm, screenshots of discussions where she had interpreted my normal motherly concern as controlling behavior and my desire to spend time with my son as codependency. According to these messages, your offer to help plan the wedding was actually you trying to take over their special day. Your suggestion about the reception venue wasn't helpful. It was you being unable to let go of Malcolm. Each revelation felt like a physical blow. I could see how she'd done it, how she'd taken my love for my son and twisted it into something ugly and possessive. Every caring gesture reframed as manipulation. Every expression of love reinterpreted as control. The pregnancy announcement. I said suddenly, when Malcolm called to tell me, he sounded different, almost apologetic, like he expected me to be upset. Ruth nodded grimly, because she'd probably already told him you would be, that you'd try to interfere or make it about yourself or find some way to undermine their happiness. I buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed by the scope of the manipulation. My son, my loving, trusting son, had been systematically turned against me by someone who'd studied us both like lab rats. "There's more," Ruth said quietly. I looked up, not sure I could handle anything else, the pregnancy itself. I had a friend who works at the medical office where Sienna supposedly had her first appointment. There's no record of any visit. Maybe she went somewhere else. Maybe there's no pregnancy at all. The words hung in the air between us. Shocking and yet somehow not surprising. It would be the ultimate manipulation. Using a non-existent grandchild to control both Malcolm and me. "I need proof," I said, my voice. "I need something concrete that Malcolm can't explain away or rationalize." Ruth was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Are you sure you're ready for this? Bernice, once we go down this road, there's no going back. Your relationship with your son might never be the same. I thought about Malcolm as a little boy, running to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting me to fix everything. I thought about the man he'd become, kind, generous, loyal to a fault. Those qualities that made him such a wonderful person also made him vulnerable to someone like Sienna. She's destroying him," I said finally. "Maybe slowly, maybe subtly, but she's destroying everything good about him. If I don't stop this, there won't be a relationship left to save." Ruth nodded, closing the folder. "Then we keep digging. But Bernice, you need to be very careful. Sienna is smart and she's ruthless. If she realizes you're onto her, she'll escalate. The ultimatum about the wedding might just be the beginning." As Ruth left that evening, I stood in my empty house, surrounded by photos of Malcolm at every stage of his life. In every picture, he was smiling, his eyes bright with trust and love. In recent photos with Sienna, that brightness had dimmed somehow, replaced by something more guarded, more careful. I'd spent 2 days mourning the loss of my invitation to my son's wedding. Now I realized that was the least of what I stood to lose. If I didn't act soon, I might lose Malcolm entirely. Not just to Sienna, but to the hollow shell of himself she was creating. But as I looked at those photos, I felt something stirring in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Not just love, not just determination, but something fiercer. Something that reminded me of the young mother who'd fought tooth and nail to protect her child from an abusive father who'd worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, who'd never once backed down when Malcolm's welfare was at stake. Sienna thought she was dealing with a harmless older woman, someone who'd accept rejection and fade quietly away. She was about to discover that a mother's love, when threatened, was the most dangerous force she'd ever encountered. The medical records arrived on a Tuesday morning, hidden inside what looked like a routine insurance envelope. Ruth had outdone herself. Her contact at the lab had been thorough and discreet. My hands trembled as I opened the packet, knowing that what I found inside would either vindicate my suspicions or prove me to be a paranoid mother losing her grip on reality. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. There was no pregnancy. The blood work was clear, dated just 3 days ago. But that wasn't the devastating part. The devastating part was the STD panel that had been run at the same time and the positive result for chlamydia. I sat in my kitchen staring at the papers until the letters blurred together. My son, my faithful, loyal son who'd never cheated on anyone in his life, was being systematically infected and betrayed by the woman he planned to marry.
My phone rang, startling me out of my shocked stupor. Ruth's name flashed on the screen. "Did you get the package?" she asked without preamble. "I got it." My voice sounded hollow, even to me. "Ruth, this is criminal. She's deliberately exposing him to disease, lying about a pregnancy. There's more." Ruth's voice was grim. I found out who she really is. I closed my eyes, bracing myself. "Tell me." Her real name is Lily Carter. She's 32, not 28 like she told Malcolm. And she's done this before, 3 times that I can confirm. The room seemed to tilt around me. "What do you mean, done this before? I mean, she has a pattern." "Bernice. She targets successful men, usually with family money or valuable assets. She isolates them from their support systems, creates fake emergencies or pregnancies to accelerate the relationship, then disappears right after securing access to their finances." Ruth's words washed over me like ice water. The other men, Adrian Lewis in Seattle. She convinced him to put her name on his condo, then cleaned out his savings account and disappeared while he was visiting his sick mother, Javier Ortiz, in Denver. She faked a miscarriage right after he changed his will to include her, then left with a substantial grief settlement his family paid to make her go away. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. And the third, Darren Cho in Portland. That one got ugly. She actually went through with the wedding, but she'd been having an affair with his business partner the entire time. She and the partner embezzled $200,000 from David's architectural firm before disappearing together. The kitchen was spinning now. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling out of my chair. So Malcolm is just another mark. A particularly valuable one. Your son has a successful career, a house with substantial equity, and a mother with retirement savings she might be convinced to loan for emergencies. Ruth paused. "Bernice, are you okay? You sound like you're hyperventilating." I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, but my chest felt tight with rage and terror. "How long do we have?" Based on her previous pattern. "Not long. The fake pregnancy accelerates everything. She'll probably manufacture some kind of crisis right after the wedding. A miscarriage that requires expensive medical treatment. Or a family emergency that needs immediate financial help. We have to tell Malcolm with what proof she's been building her case against you for months. Remember, if you show up with accusations about her past, about fake pregnancies and affairs, what's he going to think? She was right? Malcolm would think I'd lost my mind. Or worse, that I was so desperate to break up his relationship that I'd hired someone to fabricate evidence. Sienna had laid the groundwork perfectly. Anything I said would sound like the delusional rantings of a controlling mother. Then what do? We get proof he can't deny. Something so clear, so undeniable that even she can't explain it away. After Ruth hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of Sienna's deception. The fake medical records claiming pregnancy, while actual tests showed none. The STD results proving her infidelity, the documentation of her previous victims. But Ruth was right. None of it would be enough. Not when Malcolm had been conditioned for months to distrust anything I said about his fiancée. I needed something more, something personal, something that would shatter the illusion so completely that Malcolm would have no choice but to see the truth.
That's when I remembered the conversation I'd overheard 3 weeks ago. I'd stopped by Malcolm's house to drop off some documents he'd needed for his mortgage refinancing. I had my own key. He'd insisted I keep it back when our relationship was normal. I'd let myself in, calling out to announce my presence, but heard voices from the back patio. Malcolm's voice excited. I can't wait to tell Mom about the baby. She's going to be so happy. And then Sienna's response. Cold and calculating. Actually, I think we should wait. Your mother has been very stressed lately. This kind of news might overwhelm her. At the time, I thought it was considerate of her to be concerned about my emotional state. Now, I realized she'd been buying herself time. Time to figure out how to use the pregnancy announcement as a weapon against me.
But there had been something else. A phone call Sienna had taken while Malcolm was in the bathroom. I'd only caught fragments through the sliding glass door, but certain phrases had stuck with me. No, the timeline hasn't changed. Yes, after the wedding. He's completely isolated now. The mother won't be a problem much longer. I dismissed it at the time as a conversation about wedding planning or her job. Now, those words took on a sinister new meaning. My hands shook as I dialed Ruth's number again. I need surveillance equipment, I said as soon as she answered. Bernice, that's a very dangerous road to go down. If you're caught recording someone without consent, she's going to destroy my son's life. I interrupted. She's going to take everything he has, break his heart, and disappear. And she's using a fake pregnancy to do it. I need proof. Ruth. Real proof. There was a long silence. Then, what did you have in mind? Over the next hour, we hatched a plan that would have seemed impossible to me just weeks ago. Ruth would provide me with a small recording device, the kind investigators used for insurance fraud cases. I would find a way to get Sienna talking, to catch her in her own words, admitting what she was really doing. You'll only get one chance, Ruth warned. If she suspects you're recording her, she'll disappear overnight and she'll take Malcolm with her. Then I better make it count. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Sienna called me. Bernice, I think we need to talk. Her voice was syrupy sweet. The fake warmth back in full force. I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, and I feel terrible about how it went. My heart hammered against my ribs. Oh, I was hoping we could meet for coffee tomorrow. Just the two of us. I want to clear the air before the wedding. Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap. But it was also an opportunity. Maybe the only one I'd get. That sounds nice, I managed to say. My voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Where would you like to meet? We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown. The kind of place with intimate corners and ambient noise that would provide perfect cover for a recording. After I hung up, I called Ruth. She's making her move, Ruth said grimly. Whatever she's planning, she wants to make sure you're completely neutralized before the wedding. Good, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. Because I'm planning to neutralize her first. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman my son was planning to marry. The woman who'd systematically destroyed 3 other men's lives and was now working on his. The woman who was using the promise of my grandchild as a weapon against both of us. I thought about Malcolm as a little boy, trusting everyone,
believing the best in people, those beautiful qualities that made him vulnerable to someone like Sienna. I'd protected him from his father's cruelty, from neighborhood bullies, from every threat I could identify. But I'd never imagined I'd have to protect him from the woman he loved. As dawn broke over my quiet neighborhood, I made myself a cup of coffee and checked the small recording device Ruth had given me. Such a tiny thing to carry the weight of my son's future. But tomorrow in that cafe, I would either save Malcolm from the biggest mistake of his life or lose him forever trying. Either way, the truth would finally come out. The cafe was busier than I'd expected for a Wednesday afternoon. Perfect. The ambient noise would cover our conversation and make the recording clearer. Ruth had coached me on the technical details until I could recite them in my sleep. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table that would give me the best acoustics while appearing casual. My purse sat beside me, the tiny recording device already activated. My hands were steady now. The nervous energy from the past few days crystallized into cold determination. I'd spent 2 sleepless nights rehearsing this moment, preparing for every possible scenario. Sienna arrived exactly on time, looking stunning as always in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She moved through the cafe with the confidence of someone who'd never met a room she couldn't charm, heads turning as she passed. Bernice. She embraced me like we were old friends, her perfume expensive and cloying. "Thank you so much for meeting me. I know things have been tense." She settled into the chair across from me, ordering a complicated coffee drink from the hovering waitress. I noticed she didn't order any food. Another red flag that supported Ruth's theory about the fake pregnancy. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice pitched to carry just the right amount of vulnerability about family, about the future, about what's best for Malcolm and the baby. The baby. My non-existent grandchild. The phantom she was using to manipulate us both. I forced my expression to remain neutral. "Grandmother Eager, I'm glad you wanted to talk," I said carefully. "I've been thinking too." "Good." She smiled. But there was something predatory about it. "Because I have a proposition for you." My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice level. "I'm listening." Sienna leaned forward conspiratorially. "I know this whole wedding situation has been difficult. Excluding you wasn't an easy decision. But Malcolm and I felt it was necessary for establishing boundaries in our new life together." Boundaries. The word she'd trained my son to use against me. "However," she continued, "I've realized that completely cutting you out might not be the best approach. After all, you're going to be this baby's grandmother." She paused, letting that sink in. The carrot before the stick. "So, here's what I'm thinking. We could potentially work out an arrangement. A way for you to be part of our lives, but with clear expectations and guidelines." "What kind of arrangement?" I asked, though I already suspected where this was heading. "Well, Malcolm and I have been talking about finances lately, and starting a family is expensive. And with my morning sickness, I haven't been able to work as much as usual." She touched her flat stomach delicately. "We've been looking at larger houses, thinking about the future, and we've realized we need some help with the down payment." There it was, the real reason for this meeting. How much help I kept my voice carefully neutral. We were thinking maybe $50,000. "I know that sounds like a lot, but it would be an investment in your grandchild's future. A house in a good school district, a safe neighborhood for the baby to grow up in. $50,000, not as much as she'd taken from her previous victims, but substantial enough to seriously damage my retirement savings.
and I was sure it would be just the beginning. And in exchange, I prompted. In exchange, we could reconsider the wedding invitation. And of course, you'd have a relationship with your grandchild. Supervised visits, maybe helping with babysitting when the child is older. Her smile was radiant, as if she were offering me the greatest gift imaginable. Supervised visits with my own grandchild. The audacity was breathtaking. "That's very generous," I said slowly. "But I have to ask if Malcolm wanted me at the wedding. Why isn't he here having this conversation himself? For just a moment." Her mask slipped. I saw calculation flicker across her features before she recovered. Malcolm is sensitive about family dynamics. His father's abandonment really affected him. You know, he's terrified of conflict, especially when it involves the people he loves most. She reached across the table to pat my hand. He asked me to handle this because he knew it might be emotional for both of you. Another lie. Malcolm had never been afraid of conflict with me. We'd had our disagreements over the years, but we'd always worked through them together. The idea that he'd send his fiancée to negotiate our relationship was so foreign to his character that it confirmed everything Ruth had discovered. "I see," I said. "And this house you're looking at, is it contingent on getting this money from me?" "Not contingent exactly, but it would make things much easier. Malcolm's been so stressed about finances lately. He wants to provide for our family, but the pressure is really getting to him." She sighed dramatically. "Sometimes I worry about what all this stress might do to his health." The implied threat was subtle but clear. Give us the money or watch your son suffer under mysterious stress. That would somehow be my fault. "Well," I said, 50,000 is a significant amount. I'd need to think about it. Maybe talk to my financial advisor." Sienna's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, though. I should mention that we're hoping to make an offer on the house this weekend. Time is a bit of a factor. The pressure tactic creates artificial urgency to prevent me from thinking too clearly or asking too many questions. I understand. But Sienna, can I ask you something personal?" She nodded, though weariness had crept into her eyes. "This baby means everything to Malcolm. He's already talking about converting his office into a nursery, about all the things he wants to teach his child." I paused, watching her face carefully. "Have you thought about what will happen if something goes wrong? Pregnancy complications, God forbid, a miscarriage." Her reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of the concern or fear a genuinely pregnant woman might show, her expression sharpened with what looked like irritation. "Why would you even say something like that?" she snapped. "That's incredibly negative thinking. I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just know how much Malcolm is looking forward to being a father. If something happened, nothing is going to happen." Her voice was cold now, and all pretense of warmth gone. "My doctor says everything is progressing perfectly normally, and that's wonderful. Which doctor are you seeing? I'd love to send flowers to the office. Maybe a thank you note for taking such good care of my future grandchild." The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Dr. Johnson at Women's Health Associates." I nodded as if the name meant something to me, though I was certain she'd made it up on the spot. "I'll have to look them up. Is that the practice on Elm Street? No, downtown on 5th. Another lie delivered without hesitation. There was no Women's Health Associates on 5th Street. I'd looked up every OBGYN practice in the city after Ruth first suggested the pregnancy might be fake. Of course. I'm getting my streets mixed up. I smiled warmly.
I'm just so excited about becoming a grandmother. When is your next appointment? Maybe Malcolm could send me a picture of the sonogram. For the first time since she'd arrived, Sienna looked genuinely uncomfortable. We're waiting until the second trimester for the first sonogram. My doctor prefers to be cautious with first pregnancies. Another lie. Most doctors did the first sonogram between 8 and 12 weeks. And if Sienna had been pregnant as long as she claimed, she'd be well into her second trimester by now. That makes sense. I said, medical care has changed so much since Malcolm was born. I had sonograms every month. It seemed like, yes, well, every doctor has their own approach. Sienna glanced at her watch, clearly eager to end this line of questioning. So, about the money. Right? I pretended to consider it seriously. $50,000 for the down payment. And in exchange, I get to attend the wedding and have supervised visits with my grandchild. Exactly. Though I should probably mention that the supervision would just be temporary until we're sure you understand our parenting philosophy and can respect our boundaries. Our boundaries. Everything was about their boundaries, their rules, their control. And if I can't come up with the money, I asked. Sienna's smile returned, but it was colder now. Then I suppose things would continue as we originally planned. The wedding without you and very limited contact with the baby. Malcolm agrees that it's important to protect our child from negative influences.
There was the stick. Pay up or lose your son and grandchild forever. I need to think about this, I said, reaching for my purse. When do you need an answer? Soon. Like I said, we want to make the offer this weekend. I stood up, making sure the recording device was still running. Thank you for the coffee, Sienna, and for being so direct about what you want. She stood too, her confidence returning now that she thought she'd delivered the killing blow. I hope you'll make the right decision, Bernice, for Malcolm's sake and for the baby's. As I watched her walk away, her designer heels clicking against the cafe floor, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. She'd given me everything I needed. The extortion attempt, the lies about the pregnancy, the threats about my future relationship with Malcolm. But more than that, she'd shown me exactly who she was when she thought she held all the cards. Cruel, calculating, but utterly without conscience. I sat back down and ordered another coffee, pulling out my phone to call Ruth. The recording had captured every word, every threat, every lie. Now came the hard part. Figuring out how to use it to save my son without destroying him in the process. Because one thing had become crystal clear during our conversation. Sienna wasn't just planning to take Malcolm's money and disappear. She was planning to take Malcolm himself, to isolate him so completely from everyone who loved him that he'd have no choice but to depend entirely on her. The wedding was just the beginning. The real destruction would come after, when she had him legally bound to her and completely cut off from anyone who might help him see the truth. I had 5 days until the wedding. 5 days to expose her, save my son, and prevent another man from becoming her victim. It was time to turn the tables. The venue was everything I'd expected from Sienna. Expensive, ostentatious, and designed to impress rather than celebrate. The Grand View Ballroom overlooked the city.
its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view that probably cost more for one day than most people spent on their entire wedding. I stood in the parking lot at exactly 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. In my purse was a small tablet loaded with everything Ruth and I had compiled over the past month. The recording from the cafe, the medical records proving Sienna wasn't pregnant, the documentation of her previous victims, and most damning of all, the photographs. The photographs had been Ruth's breakthrough. Her contact at the lab hadn't just provided medical records, he'd also revealed that Sienna had been there with a man, not Malcolm. A tall, dark-haired stranger who'd held her hand in the waiting room and kissed her passionately before she went in for her STD test. Ruth had tracked him down within 48 hours. Terrence Boyd, a pharmaceutical sales rep from Phoenix, married with 2 kids. According to his credit card records, he'd been paying for a hotel room in our city for the past 3 months. The same hotel where Sienna had supposedly been staying during her apartment hunting trips. She'd been living a double life, playing Malcolm and Marcus against each other, probably planning to disappear with whoever offered the bigger payoff. The pregnancy story was likely being sold to both men. I smoothed my navy dress, the one I'd originally planned to wear as mother of the groom, and walked toward the entrance. The doorman looked surprised to see me. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to check the guest list. I'm the groom's mother," I said calmly. "Bernice Walker." He scrolled through his tablet, frowning. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name here." "That's correct. I wasn't invited." I met his confused gaze steadily. "But my son is about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and I'm going to stop it." Before he could respond, I walked past him into the ballroom. The ceremony was already underway. Malcolm stood at the altar in the tuxedo I'd helped him pick out, looking handsome, but somehow diminished. The joy I'd expected to see on his wedding day was absent, replaced by something that looked almost like resignation. Sienna faced him in a dress that probably cost more than my car, her veil a cascade of imported lace. She was radiant, glowing with the satisfaction of a predator about to claim her prize. The officiant was speaking about love and commitment, words that felt like mockery in this context. I made my way quietly along the back wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. About 50 guests filled the ornate chairs, mostly Sienna's friends and colleagues, with a scattering of Malcolm's co-workers who hadn't been successfully isolated yet. I recognized several faces from Ruth's research, other successful men who'd probably been cultivated as backup options. "If anyone has a reason why these two should not be wed," the officiant intoned, "speak now or forever, hold your peace." The traditional words that were meant to be ceremonial, a formality that no one ever actually invoked. But as they echoed through the ballroom, I stepped forward. "I do." The words came out stronger than I'd expected, cutting through the elegant atmosphere like a blade. Every head turned toward me, gasps rippling through the assembled guests. Malcolm's face went white, his eyes wide with shock and what looked like betrayal. "Mom." His voice cracked on the word. Lilia's perfect composure finally shattered, her face contorted with rage, the mask slipping to reveal something ugly underneath. "Get her out of here," she hissed to the security guard near the door. "Wait," I called out, pulling the tablet from my purse. "Before you have me removed, there's something everyone needs to see." I'd prepared for this moment, practiced it until I could execute it flawlessly. The tablet connected to the ballroom's AV system. Ruth had arranged that detail earlier in the week, posing as a wedding videographer doing a venue walkthrough. The first image that filled the large screens around the room was the medical record. Clear, official, undeniable. A negative pregnancy test dated just 1 week ago. "Your bride isn't pregnant," I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. She never was. Malcolm staggered backward as if I'd physically struck him. "That's impossible," the doctor confirmed. "What doctor?" "Malcolm." I clicked to the next slide. A directory listing showing that the address Sienna had given me didn't exist. Women's Health Associates on 5th Street. There is no such practice. Sienna was backing away from the altar now, her bouquet forgotten on the floor. "This is insane," she shouted. "She's having some kind of breakdown. Someone call the police." But I wasn't finished. The next slide showed the photographs from the medical clinic. Sienna and Terrence Boyd's arms, their body language unmistakably intimate. "Meet Terrence Boyd," I said calmly. "Your fiancé's other boyfriend. The one who's been paying for her hotel room for the past 3 months while she's been telling you she was apartment hunting." The gasps from the audience were audible now. Several guests were pulling out their phones, recording everything. Malcolm stood frozen at the altar, his face cycling through disbelief, horror, and dawning comprehension. "You psychotic," Sienna screamed, abandoning all pretense of composure. "You hired someone to fake these photos." "I hired someone." I agreed. "A private investigator. Because something about you never felt right." I clicked to the next slide. A compilation of newspaper clippings about Sienna's previous victims. "Your real name is Lily Carter. You're 32, not 28. And Malcolm isn't your first victim." The room erupted in chaos. Guests were standing, talking over each other, some moving toward the exits. But I kept talking, my voice carrying over the noise. Adrian Lewis in Seattle. Javier Ortiz in Denver. Darren Cho in Portland. 3 men who trusted you, who believed your lies about pregnancy and love and future. I looked directly at Malcolm, who was staring at the screens with an expression of absolute devastation. "You were just the next Mark, son. The next successful man to be isolated, manipulated, and ultimately destroyed." That's when Sienna made her final mistake. Instead of continuing to deny everything, instead of trying to maintain even a shred of her deception, she snapped completely. "You ruined everything." She shrieked, lunging toward me with her hands outstretched like claws. He was supposed to be mine. The house, the money, all of it. Security caught her before she could reach me. But the damage was done in front of 50 witnesses. She'd essentially confessed to everything. The pretense of love, the manipulation, the financial motivation, all of it laid bare in a moment of pure rage. Malcolm sank into a chair at the front of the ballroom, his head in his hands. I wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but I knew he needed space to process what had just happened. Instead, I played the final piece of evidence, the audio recording from our cafe meeting. Sienna's voice filled the ballroom, clear and unmistakable, demanding $50,000 and threatening to cut me out of my grandchild's life if I didn't comply. A grandchild that doesn't exist, I said as the recording ended. Used as a weapon to extort money and isolate my son from his family. The ballroom was nearly empty now. Most of the guests had fled, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The few who remained were people I recognized as Malcolm's genuine friends, staying to support him through the worst moment of his life. Sienna was still screaming as security escorted her out. Threats and accusations spilling from her lips in an incoherent stream. Something about lawyers and lawsuits, and how she'd destroy us both. But her words carried no weight now. Everyone had seen her true nature, heard her own voice confirming everything I'd revealed. I powered down the tablet and walked slowly toward my son. He looked up as I approached, his eyes red with tears and shock. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I don't understand how I could have been so blind." I sat beside him, careful not to overwhelm him with too much physical comfort too soon. "She's very good at what she does. Malcolm, she studied you, learned exactly how to manipulate your best qualities against you. But I chose her over you. I believed her lies about you being controlling, about needing boundaries." He shook his head, disgust evident in his voice. "God, Mom, I'm so ashamed." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," I said firmly. Loving someone, trusting them, wanting to build a life together, those aren't weaknesses. She exploited your capacity for love. But that capacity is what makes you who you are. We sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his wedding day. Flowers scattered across the floor, chairs overturned in the chaos, the elegant decorations now seeming like props in a cruel theater. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "I started suspecting something was wrong when she uninvited me from your wedding, but I didn't have proof until this week." I turned to face him fully. "Malcolm, I need you to know something. Even if I'd been wrong, even if she'd been everything she claimed to be, I would have found a way to accept her because you're my son, and your happiness matters more to me than my own comfort." He broke down then, shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. All the months of manipulation, isolation, and emotional abuse came pouring out of him. I held him while he cried. This grown man who was still my little boy, and felt my own tears falling silently. The ballroom manager approached us hesitantly. "Sir, ma'am, we need to clear the venue." "Of course," I said, helping Malcolm to his feet. "We're leaving." As we walked out together, Malcolm's arm linked through mine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The immediate crisis was over, but I knew the real work was just beginning. Malcolm would need time to heal, to rebuild his sense of self, to learn to trust his own judgment again. But we would face it together, the way we should have been facing everything all along. Mother and son. Family in the truest sense of the word. Behind us. The Grand View Ballroom stood empty except for the debris of Sienna's final performance. Tomorrow, it would host another wedding, another celebration of love and hope. But today, it had served a different purpose. As the stage where truth finally triumphed over deception, where a mother's love proved stronger than a predator's manipulation. 3 months after the wedding that never was, I stood in my kitchen making Malcolm's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup. It had become our Sunday tradition,
These quiet mornings where we talked about everything and nothing, slowly rebuilding the relationship that Sienna had nearly destroyed. Malcolm sat at the table, looking healthier than he had in over a year. The hollow look in his eyes had faded, replaced by something I'd almost forgotten. The spark of the sun I'd raised, confident and unafraid. He was reading the newspaper, occasionally making comments about local politics or sports, his voice carrying the easy warmth that had been missing for so long. "Ruth called yesterday," I said, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "The prosecutor thinks they have enough to charge Sienna with fraud in at least 3 states. Malcolm looked up from the paper. "Good. She needs to be stopped before she destroys someone else's life." The legal case had been building steadily since the wedding disaster. Ruth's evidence, combined with testimony from Sienna's previous victims, painted a clear picture of systematic fraud. The fake pregnancy, the extortion attempt, the forged medical documents. It was enough to put her away for years. But more importantly, Malcolm was healing. The first month had been the hardest. He'd moved back in with me temporarily, unable to face the house he'd shared with Sienna, the bedroom where she'd lied to him every night, the office he'd planned to convert into a nursery for a baby that never existed. We'd spent hours talking through the manipulation, identifying the patterns she'd used to isolate him from his friends and family. It was painful work, like performing surgery on his memories, but necessary for his recovery. "I got a call from Javier Ortiz yesterday," Malcolm said, accepting the plate of pancakes I set in front of him. "He wanted to thank us for exposing her. Apparently, she tried to contact him right after the wedding, spinning some story about how I'd abused her and she needed rescue." Did he believe her for about 5 minutes? Then he remembered how she'd emptied his bank account. Malcolm shook his head. He said knowing her real pattern helped him process his own experience. He's thinking about writing a book, How to Spot Financial Predators in Relationships. I poured myself coffee and joined him at the table. That's good. The more people who know about her methods, the harder it'll be for her to find new victims. Speaking of which, Malcolm said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I wanted to talk to you about something." My stomach clenched automatically. Months of crisis had programmed me to expect bad news, but Malcolm's expression was calm, even determined. "I've been thinking about the money," he said. "The $40,000 I spent on that wedding, the engagement ring, all of it. I want to do something meaningful with what's left." After the wedding disaster, Malcolm had been able to recover most of the deposits, the venue, the caterer. Even the florist had been sympathetic once they understood what had happened. The engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond that had cost him 6 months of savings, had been returned when Sienna fled the city. "What did you have in mind?" "A foundation. Something to help other people who've been victims of romantic fraud." He leaned forward, animated in a way I hadn't seen since before he met Lilia. "There's no real support network for people who've been conned by someone they loved. No resources. No counseling specifically designed for this kind of trauma." I felt pride swell in my chest. This was my son. The man who'd always wanted to help others, to make meaning from his pain. "That's a wonderful idea," I said softly. "I want to call it the Walker Foundation," he continued. "Named after the strongest woman I know, the one who refused to give up on me even when I gave up on myself." Tears pricked my eyes. "Malcolm, I mean it. Mom, you saved my life. If you hadn't investigated her,
if you hadn't been brave enough to stand up at that wedding." He shook his head. "I would have lost everything, my house, my savings, maybe even my job. If she'd convinced me to relocate like she was planning." We'd learned about the relocation plan from Terrence Boyd. Sienna had been pressuring both men to move to different cities, isolating them further from their support systems while positioning herself to disappear more easily when the time came. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. Ruth's name appeared on the screen. "Sorry," I said to Malcolm, "but it might be important." "Bernice."
Ruth's voice was tight with excitement. "Turn on Channel 7 now." I grabbed the remote, switching to the local news. A familiar face filled the screen. Detective Aisha Monroe holding a press conference outside the courthouse. Thanks to evidence provided by private citizens and investigators, we've been able to connect Lily Carter, also known as Sienna Cole, to fraudulent activities in 4 states spanning the past 7 years. The defendant has been charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The reporter cut to file footage of Lilia being led away in handcuffs, her designer clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair disheveled. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her armor of manipulation and lies. The victims in this case showed remarkable courage in coming forward. Detective Monroe continued. Their willingness to share their experiences has prevented what could have been additional crimes and helped us build a comprehensive case against the defendant. Malcolm reached over and squeezed my hand. "We did it," he said quietly. The news segment continued with interviews from some of the other victims. Adrian Lewis, the man from Seattle, spoke about the importance of recognizing the warning signs. Javier Ortiz discussed the shame that kept many victims silent and how sharing their stories could help others. "There's something else," Ruth said over the phone. "The FBI wants to use your case as part of a training program for their financial crimes unit. Your recording from the cafe is apparently a textbook example of extortion tactics." After Ruth hung up, Malcolm and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the trees outside my kitchen window. The leaves were changing color, fall arriving with its promise of renewal and fresh starts. "I need to tell you something," Malcolm said eventually, "about the months before the wedding, when I was pulling away from you. I'd been dreading this conversation, afraid of what I might hear, but I knew we needed to have it. Part of me knew something was wrong," he continued. "Not consciously, but somewhere deep down. That's why I was so defensive whenever you tried to get close. I wasn't just protecting her from you, I was protecting myself from having to face what I already suspected. Malcolm, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." He met my eyes directly. "I chose to believe her lies because the truth would have meant admitting I'd been fooled. That I'd chosen someone who didn't love me over the person who'd loved me unconditionally my entire life." The pain in his voice was raw, honest. This was the conversation we'd been building toward for months. I was so angry at myself for being vulnerable to her manipulation that I turned that anger on you instead, because you represented everything I felt like I'd failed at. Discernment, loyalty, family. He paused. "I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for the wedding, but for all of it. For making you fight for a relationship that should never have been in question." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You were being manipulated by a professional dean, someone who'd practiced these techniques on multiple victims, someone who studied psychology and human nature to perfect her methods. The fact that you eventually recognized something was wrong, even subconsciously, shows how strong you actually are. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about never being fooled, I said. It's about what you do when you realize you've been fooled. You didn't double down on the lies or blame everyone else for your situation. You faced the truth even when it was humiliating. You're helping other victims, turning your experience into something meaningful. Over the following weeks, Malcolm threw himself into planning the foundation. He researched existing resources, consulted with therapists who specialized in trauma recovery, and connected with other fraud victims who wanted to help. I watched him transform his pain into purpose and felt a pride deeper than anything I'd experienced as his mother. This was who he really was, not the diminished, isolated man Sienna had been creating, but someone who could take the worst experience of his life and use it to help others. The foundation launched 6 months later, operating out of a small office downtown. Malcolm had partnered with local therapists, financial advisors, and legal aid societies to provide comprehensive support for romance fraud victims. I attended the opening ceremony, watching as Malcolm addressed a room full of people who'd experienced similar betrayals. His voice was steady, confident, carrying the authority of someone who'd survived and chosen to help others do the same. Recovery from this kind of fraud isn't just about getting your money back, he said. It's about rebuilding your ability to trust others. Yes. But more importantly, yourself. It's about learning that being loving and trusting aren't weaknesses to be ashamed of, but strengths that make the world better. After the ceremony, as we cleaned up the reception, Malcolm handed me an envelope. "What's this?" "The first newsletter, yeah," he said. "Look at page 3. I flipped to the page he'd indicated and found an article titled, "When Mothers Know Best, Trusting Family Instincts." It was the story of our experience told from Malcolm's perspective, focusing on how family members often see warning signs that victims miss. "I wanted people to know," he said, "that sometimes the people who love us most can see what we can't, and that it's okay to listen to them, even when it's painful." The article ended with a dedication to my mother, Bernice Walker, who never stopped fighting for me, even when I stopped fighting for myself. As I read those words, I felt a peace settle over me that I hadn't experienced in years. Not just because the ordeal was over, but because we'd emerged from it stronger, more honest with each other than we'd ever been. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my quiet kitchen, I reflected on everything that had changed. The empty space where Sienna's lies used to live had been filled with truth. Hard-won and precious. Malcolm and I had learned to communicate without the filter of manipulation between us. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that a mother's instincts, that deep, unshakable knowledge of our children, wasn't something to doubt or second guesses. It was a gift honed by years of love and attention. And sometimes it was the most powerful weapon we had against those who would harm our families. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. Malcolm's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, Mom?" His voice was warm, happy. "I know it's Monday, but I was wondering if you'd like company for dinner. I brought Chinese takeout." "You know, you're always welcome," I said, smiling as I heard his key in the lock. He appeared in the kitchen carrying bags of food and wearing the easy grin I remembered from his childhood. No shadows in his eyes, no tension in his shoulders, just my son. Home where he belonged. Safe and whole and free. as we spread the takeout containers across my kitchen table. The same table where Sienna had once tried to buy my silence. I marveled at how completely our lives had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by the simple joy of being a family again. Malcolm was sharing a story about one of the Foundation's success stories when he paused mid-sentence. "What on?" I asked. "I just realized something," he said, his expression thoughtful. "I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy. I can't remember the last time I felt this way." "When?" I asked softly. He thought for a moment. "Before I met her. Before I started doubting myself and everyone who loved me." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for giving me back my life, Mom." "You gave yourself back your life," I corrected. "I just reminded you who you really were." Outside my kitchen window, the evening light was fading. But inside, we were surrounded by warmth and laughter and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. The nightmare was over. The healing was complete, and the future, for the first time in years, looked bright with possibility. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. Thank you for